Well, good evening, Jan Recker, and we have a very exciting discussion to have today. We have Sarah and Natalia and Hila joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And I mean, everyone knows Natalia Levina. She's like a huge celebrity, and Hila is also a rock star. But Sarah's kind of a funny one, Recker, because this is what I heard about her. Every paper she submits to a top journal just automatically gets in.
Well, that holds true for all of them, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's true for all of them. There's something going on.
Oh no!
Yeah, right. Please, can we roll back the tapes? Let's start this over. Knock on wood.
I don't think people should have this impression. That's not true of any of us. Like who've been in it for a while, you still struggle and you still get rejections. So
we all do, but in all seriousness, I mean, Nick is right. I mean, you three have an impressive array of not just papers that end up in great journals, but I read all of them. In fact, well, not all of yours, Natalia. To be honest, that's too many to read. But Hila and Sarah,
we don't have that much time.
No, and it's really cool. I mean, you got papers on NASA, you got papers on doctors, you got papers on AI. Now you're all over the place.
Well, you know what? So this goes back to a couple of podcasts, and we'll get to your paper in a second. But in a previous podcast, I gave you my theory on what makes a great research career. And if you look at Natalia's career, she was an expert in something, right? She was really focusing on boundary spanners, and at least how I would construct your career, Natalia, is you knew that stuff inside and out for like a decade. And only after then you went in every direction that you're currently in, right?
pretty much, I think, well, I kind of had my early interest was in outsourcing, so kind of maybe less interesting to this audience, but I did start in outsourcing, and there are parts of outsourcing that are not about boundary spanning. So I do feel that's where I ventured to some degree. And then I remember, maybe that'd be interesting, but when I joined NYU, Lee Sproul was my mentor. And Lee said, she's the person who follows phenomena. And she said, it's not a career for everybody. And I kind of feel I've become that. I follow phenomena with some strong feelings about theory, let's put it this way. But, lots of us in IS, we get excited about phenomena. Now I'm excited about AI. I'm also excited about many other things. That's unfortunate because I'm too excited about many exciting
tell me
things.
about it.
So
exactly,
guys, we got you on the show because of the paper that is forthcoming in the MISQ special issue on managing AI, and your paper is about AI ground truth and how much truth there is in truth, so to speak, in a cool setting in a US hospital setting. But before we get to this, what's the connection between the three of you? How did you team up for this study, or did you work before? Were you all always, because you all work at different universities, aren't you? No, Hila and Natalia, you're both at NYU, aren't you?
Yeah.
And Sarah was also last year.
This was
my student.
This was based on my dissertation research. So we've spent a lot of time. Hila and Natalia are my advisors, close collaborators, and mentors, and so many things.
Dude, Recker, you did no background checking, did you? This is the most obvious thing in the world. Sarah,
I was like, well, this is really cool. How the hell did they come together? Oh, this is really boring.
This is like her second year at Virginia, right? You were at NYU up until
just finished first year. Yes.
First year. This was your first year at Virginia?
Just finishing the first. Yeah.
So you had a COVID year for your first year at the new school. Yeah.
It
sucks.
Yeah.
She also had a COVID defense, we had a Zoom defense in April.
We still haven't had the chance
to drink. We haven't celebrated.
Someday soon.
Well, I'll be there with you in Houston or in Austin, right? So maybe we can. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a podcast, Recker and I, at Austin. We asked them, and we're going to do a happy hour podcast. So we'll have drinks, and you should join us.
For sure.
But so Sarah, this is your dissertation work, and it's a ton of ethnographic. Tell us about, so how did you get out there? Hospitals aren't easy. And then what kind of stuff did you do? You clearly didn't have this idea in mind before you went into the field, right?
Right. So it's, when I was trying to figure out what my dissertation would be, the three of us spent many hours and many days and weeks deciding what would be a really cool context and what would be a fun and interesting place, what would be hot on the job market, what's interesting, what questions do we have that need to be answered. And I think AI was right at the top of the list. And it was a matter of, like you said, context, like getting access. I think we thought about places where AI was making decisions that really mattered. So healthcare was at the top of the list. So was HR. We all felt really, and still feel really interested in, that context where things really get interesting and there's a lot of subjectivity. So we tried on all fronts, pushed in all of these areas, and just through some personal relationships and lots of conversations, we missed a lot of times. We didn't get access way more times than we finally got into a hospital where we really aligned with the person who we had these first conversation with. They were also really interested in AI in radiology. So we had this aligned interest, and because it's a teaching hospital that they really value research, they're also conducting a ton of research on AI in their field. We just had this, really great stars aligning moment that led us.
So when you say we, who did the phone call? Like, how did you do it? How did you get in there?
I'd say Natalia, you had some personal kind of here and there, couple steps removed relationships. So reached out, and then we had a meeting with this person at the site. I'm not being too cryptic, but we can't give away, the site. It is
Yeah, exactly. We need to keep the site confidential in that sense for the paper, so we cannot tell the whole connections and everything, because then it will.
I find that very interesting. I do some field research as well, and a lot of people that do. And you basically said, well, you selected a phenomenon, you wanted to study AI, and then you went to search for an appropriate setting, and then you ended up at that site. I find that interesting because most of the times it's the other way around. People get access to a setting, they go and study there, and then they realize that within that setting, there's an interesting question emerging. And the danger with that strategy is oftentimes there's not, or you don't know what that is, or you have to search for a long time until you find something that is actually worth investigating. So what I'm saying is very often I find that people find the setting first and then figure out what the problem is. And you seem to be doing it the other way around. Is that how you normally do it, or is it just a happenstance, so to speak?
There's 3 qualitative researchers potentially with multiple answers, right?
Yeah, but I think it's important, if I may add to what you said, that Sarah, this is not the first field site that we tried. So I think it maybe, for our listeners, it's important to know that it doesn't happen as magic. You introduced us as like everything we do is so super smooth. That's not how it works. She actually spent a whole summer in another field site before this one that we thought, and we also kind of targeted it. It was around AI and fairness and things that we thought were really important, but it did not become rich enough for a field research potential dissertation and for an ethnography. So
did you get any data out of that?
Well, not data that we used. It became like it broadened our understanding of what's going on and where interesting questions were. And it gave me some credibility to take to my next field site and say, hey, I just spent 3 months at IBM. I can say that. I mean, that wasn't our field site.
I was thinking it's not secret.
Right. So I was in IBM research. I was looking at the new upcoming products. I have been in these conversations. And so it helped me with the next phase, but it was basically a wasted 3 months of field research, besides the sort of context gathering and just immersion that is useful. It was useful, but it was not useful.
I think one thought, just to add, one thought we had is like we would get to Sarah's interest in AI in practice by studying with technology people, right? They will lead us towards like places where it's used. But it turned out that actually there weren't that much. One of the things we faced, especially Sarah, when she started looking, was 2018. I'm trying to remember. There wasn't that much widespread use of AI in professional work where it would be interesting. And we sort of had not such, we weren't that interested in finance and marketing, which is where you could find some of it. So there's other places we just didn't have, like if phenomena moves, now it's much easier, I would imagine, to find some of it.
But it's still hard with HR. I think we tried, and I know many people try, and with HR, which unfortunately the phenomena is very strong in the field, we don't have enough research on. So I think that is still something that we don't know enough, even though the industry is doing already.
But I think one of the reasons for that is pragmatics. Is it's sensitive data. It's very hard to work with HR just because of the sensitivity of everything involved.
Especially for a qualitative study where we're asking to come in and watch their practices and ask them hard questions in interviews. You can only
so Nick knows this. I think my theory is that a lot of what we do is based on where's easy data access. So I think that drives a lot of research questions, a lot of studies out there. Is just, I'm going to study this because that is easy to get. And if you think about AI and HR sensitive stuff, so we don't do a lot of sensitive stuff because it's really difficult and you need to go through very complicated ethics approvals and all that sort of stuff. And it makes it hard. And it's much easier to grab a database where there's some data lying around and then run models on that.
So I'm not sure about, sorry, just for my 2 cents, that's not what we do.
Not easy.
And also for all my studies, I always try to get to what I wanted to study. And if that meant waiting, years sometimes, for my dissertation, just to go back in history, I think I usually wanted to get to a place I was interested in, which meant a lot of rejections rather than going for easy data. So, one thing that might be useful, right? Oh, I was just going to say, eventually what I did learn, social networks do matter, right? So while I was trying cold, and Sarah did too, just cold emails and stuff, they usually don't go that far. But pursuing it and trying to use social network to find people connected, that does usually help work. But
the hospital was not easy in that sense. I don't think it's easier actually than HR. There are a lot of privacy concerns. We had to spend a whole year. Sarah went to the #1 radiology conference in the world to get to understand radiology. We read gazillion radiology papers. That is something that we didn't know as a context, right? They have their own world, their own language. To really be able to understand how AI is used in practice, you have to understand the practice first. And that was challenging. That's why I think we tried first with companies, IBM, that made sense to us, right? We could maybe understand what they're doing. So that required a lot of learning.
So you mentioned
all of us.
You mentioned radiology. That is the hot. I was just teaching executives this morning, and they were talking about how there will no longer be radiologists because now we have AI. And they actually, in their presentation, one of my students had detecting some cancer in lungs. Right? It's the hot domain in healthcare. Yeah. Did you know going into it that you wanted to study radiology? Okay.
Well, this was why it was at the top. We knew that there were some applications that were promising to make this big impact. So this was when you ask what was motivating the study, one thing we knew for sure was that we saw the media just like all of your students and just like all the radiologists, they see that there's these headlines in the New York Times and in the Atlantic saying radiologists are going away, pick a new field. So we were really motivated to figure out what's really going on and what's just the media kind of portrayal.
And I think that's really where the value of a paper is, right? This is what it makes it really interesting, and the contribution so remarkable really is that you go in and say let's have a look at what really goes on when AI comes into a radiology department and how they evaluate what's good and bad and and all this sort of stuff, and what's really going on the coalface that's the practice. So and I think just doing this, just by doing this, it just is such an immense value add to the literature that we get this picture and not just the stories from the media. I always reminded me of IBM Watson. Was it Watson 10 years ago they talked about this, right? And I always thought, well, where is it? Why hasn't it come forward? And now we know why, because the practice, the reality is quite different and obviously more complicated and more nuanced than all this sort of glossy talk makes it out to be.
Yep.
Good. Well, I guess that wasn't a question. That was a statement. And I'll tell you this.
But I can definitely say that exactly what Nick you were describing, and Jan, all these things, that's exactly what triggered us. I remember Karim Lakhani, tweeting, don't, study radiology anymore. There's no need. AI is going to replace us all. And that was I don't know, already 3-4 years ago. Yeah. And I was like, really? That's it? This whole profession is done. And I didn't even know anything about radiology, but it made it so intriguing, right?
Actually, I remember responding to Karim's tweet and he didn't respond back to me. I was like, are you sure? Because he specifically said, if you're finishing medical school now and considering going for residency in radiology, think again, that's a waste of your life.
Exactly.
And your money.
This is done.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because when in the early, if we're going kind of under the hood of how this paper came about, sort of in those early months when we were looking at the data and I was writing memos and sharing with Hila and Natalia, and we were in the data together, just trying to figure out what's going on. Some of the most prominent things right from the beginning were these identity questions and things about, where will I be as a radiologist in the next few years? And we sort of that's kind of the thing that just jumps in the face at the beginning. But we had other things that kept emerging that we didn't expect at all, like these things around ground truth and some more issues with how they're actually using it and ignoring the tool. And so we had many things that kept our interest, and we kind of needed to put that identity piece sort of kind of on the back burner, even though in the media, we had lots of other things that kind of were grabbing our attention as well.
So did you actually follow, like, tell us about your ethnographic practice? Because I've never actually done an ethnography. I've done qualitative work, but not, like, did you do the note taking every night? And like, what did you do? Tell us what it's like in the field. First of all, how long were you in the field? Right?
So I spent around a year, really about 9 months intensely, with a few weeks here and there in the final few months as I was on the job market, and sort of took me away from.
When you say 9 months intensely, so does that mean Monday through Friday, kind of 9 to 5, you were there, or?
No, I would say most weeks around 3 to 4 days, about half days is what I would spend. Sometimes I would start in the morning at 8 in the morning at the breast imaging center, and then I would go to the neuroradiologist center in the afternoon, or I would go to spend 3 hours observing the chest imaging, and then I would go to a meeting where they were doing the evaluation of new tools. So
right. When you say observing the chest imaging, what does that mean? You're sitting in a room and seeing one chest image after another? I mean, there's nothing to, like, I go there 2 hours, I feel like I've seen everything I need to see about chest imaging. Right?
Well, sort of. So I would go
in that sense. It's not it is a dark room that Sarah went to, right? It's not like as exciting as.
Yeah, you're bringing me back. It's actually, so I would enter the hospital, go up to the 3rd floor, and nobody knows me, and I sort of feel uncomfortable. Do they even think I belong here? I'm not wearing a lab coat. I am this, PhD student. Nobody. So I get in there. I kind of have to pick someone to sit by. I always feel like I'm imposing because they're so busy, and they just all they want to do is get their work done and help their patients. And I'm, kind of an inconvenience. They think I'm an inconvenience. So I find one of the people I have a better relationship with, or if there's someone I've never met, I try to sit by them. And I just explain who I am. It's really uncomfortable. And so then I finally just settle in, and I'm so happy to have someone to shadow that I don't have to bother anyone else. So then I have my notebook. It's pitch black in these rooms because they have to read the contrast on their screens. I'm with my notebook 2 inches from my face, trying to write down what's happening. And so the things I'm trying to write down are, I'm trying to describe the case that they're looking at, which is really hard because they're looking at images and I'm trying to describe them in words. I would sketch out these images of like my view of the lungs with the dots, and it was just very bizarre. And then, I would spend 4 hours trying to understand their case. There'd be medical students there too, and they would be explaining what they're doing to the medical students. So there was interaction. There's people coming in and going. It wasn't just sitting watching.
I think that really helped. The fact that this was a teaching hospital. So there was some talking, because Nikki, you're right. It could be just boring, like sitting behind a person just looking at an image, but they were explaining to also med school students. So Sarah, from that sense, also was part of, and she could hear the debates and the discussions and the teaching. So that was really
They would call each other on the phone. They would have no clue about what to say about a patient. They would bring each other over to have these conversations. And yes, I would leave the field. I'd have these scratched notes in my notebook, and I would try to just untangle them and add more context. And there's only so much you can keep up with. They would be doing, 10 cases faster than I could keep up. And I'd have to try to write just like code
and
in my
your field notes. Did you put them in a computer each day, or what did you
I would go home and type them. I typed every single note up and I took pictures of my notes and then put them into my field notes in the digital file. So
that's why it's important not to go all day long. When you ask Nick, like every day, 9 to 5, if you do that, you have no time to like organize your data, to like absorb it mentally. It's really overwhelming. Like I remember Sarah returning from the first few weeks. It's overwhelming. Also, this is radiology. This is cancer diagnosis. This is, not something, it is overwhelming cognitively, emotionally at the beginning.
I was going to say
so we need some time.
That when Sarah, like when we were talking about the field study choice, like you asked earlier, and I was hoping for HR myself, like I thought it was an interesting context. And we ended up sort of having this connection with the medical center. I asked Sarah many times, are you sure you're ready for this? Because I do think it's emotionally taxing. So being in healthcare and like, have family members who had cancer at some point. So I said, are you sure? Like many times, do you remember? She's like, yes, I'm ready. I'm emotionally ready. I don't think I could have done it right now, just in my state of life, because it's just would have been too hard. But I'm just saying there is a healthcare itself is a special setting in that sense, where you do need to be, emotionally able to deal with that, because they're reading and there are a bunch of these are cancers and there are people behind this film. So anyway, Sarah did a great job.
Yeah. I think at the time, I just was so happy to have a field site. It was
Yes.
like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I got this.
Yeah, I was like, okay, well, deal if you can deal with it.
So can I take you on a tangent here, because the picture you just painted, Sarah, is one of richness, right? Lots of detail, little things, etc. Right, and that's obviously the beauty of ethnographic fieldwork, but it's also the challenge, I guess, right? You got to find that story. You got to be able to publish it in very limited space, where a lot of that detail and richness has to go missing. And if I remember correctly from the review process, the first couple of rounds really, you were trying to find that story, right? I think you started with a sort of like adoption type of focus, right? And then you ended up with this evaluation storyline, I guess. Is that fair to say that it sort of in the beginning wasn't really quite clear in which direction you would take this, or?
So I think the process was definitely iterative. I went back and before this and I looked at our very first submission and just sort of laughed at how different it looks to see it now. And really the fact that it's just transformed so much is, I guess, not shocking for qualitative research. At the same time, it feels like a completely lifetime ago. I think our paper we started and we were really looking at, we wanted this to be on evaluation of the tools, but the data we brought in the very first submission, it got really muddy because we were using both the managers who are also radiologists and the actual radiologists in their daily work. So there was this confusion about what's being evaluated. Is it the tools at this high level, or is it in the moment of use by the radiologists who are making judgments in their daily practice? So we had to untangle this, and that was really hard for us to do. And eventually we just, through this process, we just focused on the managers in this paper, and we have to kind of leave the other data for a different paper. So it was hard, yeah, clearly.
You started in 2018, and then I think the call for paper for the special issue was summer 2019, and it had a very short call for papers, right? It was only on for a couple of months, because the idea that we had was that we wanted research that was already mature and already being done, and we wanted to attract these papers to the special issue. We didn't want to have one of these standard call for papers. The call for paper comes out, people go and do research and submit it 2 years later, right? So we learned a few interesting things. There was actually one team of an author team that got a paper in the special issue that literally started when they read the call for papers. They had a simulation, right? So sort of formal modeling type of paper. You obviously couldn't do empirics in like 3-4 months. But how was it for you? I mean, were you doing this research and then you saw the call for papers like, hey, that's a nice outlet, or how,
well,
how did you come to submit?
Our faces, our listeners, the three of us are laughing because I don't know why you both are laughing. I know I'm laughing. I'm assuming it's the same. So I had been in the field. I was just leaving the field, and that was also the time of the job market. So I had a job market paper and a job talk that really just presented a lot of this data. We had all these thoughts kind of floating in our heads, but it wasn't they were kind of still mixed into one paper. And so this call for papers came out while I was on the job market, and we thought, hey, this is a perfect opportunity. Why don't we try to write something? And it was just such a chaotic process.
I'm laughing because
market. Yeah. It was just insane. And we decided we would submit, even though it felt really aggressive. And I think both Hila and Natalia said, okay, sure, let's try this. And really there was no confidence.
I remember it somewhat differently because I was basically pushing for it, and Hila was saying it's impossible.
I was laughing my heart out when I saw that. I was like, no way, you can do the job work and do the MISQ. I was like, sure, we can also fly to the moon.
That is exactly what she said. I remember you standing in my little cubby.
I remember.
And you stood right there and you said, you want to try to submit what? And you laughed.
I did. I'm sorry. And then I apologized. I remember returning after an hour, still, she was a PhD student. So I felt so guilty that I'm discouraging her. Like I could not withhold myself from laughing because it just felt completely unrealistic to do it in the timeline that we had. Field work takes time. It takes time to collect the data. It takes time to analyze it. It takes time. So I think that's why we had to do it, the three of us. Like it would never be possible unless it was like this teamwork. It just takes a lot of time. And even with that, it was really hard, crazy work to make it in the timeline. And that's the beauty, but that's also the challenge, I would have to say, with special issues. They push you, right? And the review process is like 3 months, and it was all intense. So indeed, so an hour later, I told Sarah, seriously, I'm sorry that I laughed, but that's a great ambitious thing. I was trying to do the politically correct advising kind of to take it back. And like, it's very ambitious,
And I know at one point we wrote and we said, can we please have an extension? And Nick wrote us back and said, nope, sorry.
Yes, I remember every deadline, every revision was like every last week of it felt like we're striving for like air to breathe. It was like we were working like scratching the last minute and working.
Did you have a process? Like the three of you clearly seem to work very well together. You say we a lot. You went and found the site. I mean, it's really cool. It makes me think NYU is a very happy place to hang out.
I was gonna say, but we learned our joint. So Hila and Sarah worked on another paper together. I wasn't involved in that, so they had their process. There was some like question of what this 3-person process looks like, because I have. Actually, I have had collaboration of 3 people working like fully collaboratively. In the past, it was challenging, like just because coordinating different styles, like not the kind of like, let me read the finished product and comment, but like really writing together. But I think that we learned that we can work so well together while doing it. So it's not like the process got.
What do you mean by really writing together? So what happens?
Well,
what do you do?
I don't know. Like Sarah, maybe you describe your version of it. In that whatever that deadline was, there was it November, December for the first submission.
Yeah, like November.
That was 15th, like, we have offices.
Yeah, maybe there was something with the previous, I think, Sarah, you can talk about it also. Like, I think what we learned, like Sarah and I, our previous study was studying like hackathons. And one of the things we were impressed by are how people are able to do things under this extremely short amount of time. And it made us feel very embarrassed as academics, right? Like these people were able to produce like new working product in like 3 days. And for us, everything takes so much longer and it's so time consuming. So we tried tiny bit to like borrow, I would say, some practices, because writing is very different than building a product, but some mental even processes of the mindset to try to work in these iterative cycles and not to have like know exactly where you're going, but let the writing also help you discover. So like work with the data, work with the writing, and do this like really quick iterative cycle, like rapid prototyping constantly, instead of like, I know what I'm writing.
We definitely let go of perfection. It was not something, so if you ask our process, I'd say we would always start with the data and the findings. It was always, let's understand what's going
interesting.
On.
Yeah.
What are the things that are emerging? Is this a process? Do we have phases? Do we have, how do these things relate? And so I think I was in the data most heavily, just figuring this out, bringing quotes, understanding the context of the quote, describing it. And I would write, pages, maybe 10 or 20 or more, and then we would share them. Natalia and Hila would read them. We would meet for an hour. That was never enough. We would go over and stay for 2 hours or 3. And then we would try to put it in some sort of figures, boxes and arrows, even if it was really crass or something. And then sort of point to quotes and say, that is really interesting. Like, let's explore that. And then another round of 20 pages to share and read. And then we started to pile on framing or try to figure out what literatures we're speaking to, and then read those and come back. Oh, we already know this in previous work, so let's try to find something new. So it was, I think the data kind of led the process, and there was a lot of reading and discussion and figure drawing.
I was gonna comment a little bit on it in terms of direction. Ian, you said earlier that sometimes you go for a site and figure out your question later. This is true to a degree, because we knew our interest was in how like real professionals use real AI as opposed to like, something else. But this paper, so we ended up like writing kind of two papers, right? One that's about the everyday use, and this paper is about evaluation. That was a new question. Like the initial kind of focus has been more on everyday use, which is what you saw in the first submission, which is still an important and interesting paper we're developing. But I think so one thing that I felt always defines this paper, because the call for papers actually helped us figure out what we want to write about. The call for papers was about the managerial perspective. I remember how much, Nick, you emphasized managerial. So I said, what's the managerial and how does it tie to what we find emerging interesting in the data? And the one thing that I always thought we kind of had as our kind of little, what this paper is about, the ground truth was very prominent. So
from day one, that was there in that first version.
I think it was there very early, right? Maybe we had it under slightly different, like it was ground truth or understanding what's true, something like this. So between that and the managerial focus plus the data, that's what helped shape the first draft. We need a managerial focus, which what the manager is concerned about is whether this tool is any good, right? Whether this is actually helping the professionals do their work. Then there's sort of a lot of that concern comes down to quotes and everything about ground truth. And the AUC, actually, if you guys remember the first paper, half of it was an area under the curve, right? The ROC curves. It was huge in the data. They talk a lot about these curves, but once we start digging, that's the subsequent revisions, that became less prominent because the real issue behind the ROC curves was the ground truth. So that was more how revisions helped us focus. But my part of my answer is, no, it's not we came in looking for evaluation data. Sarah went in looking for the adoption and use, and evaluation became an important part of it. And your call helped us sort of focus on that part as we're kind of writing about and understanding more.
So that was another, go for it.
Yeah, we've got we had one group do Agile. We had another group do project management with Gantt charts, right? And then this group did a hackathon, right? So we have different paper.
And one group did sequence, really straight sequence. First person does something, and then the second person takes it.
This is funny.
This is really funny.
But I have to say that the other secret that we're not saying, and because Sarah is modest, is being really well organized. So that's what I think gives you the ability to do all this rapid prototyping and to work so fast with the data that anytime we would see something interesting and we'd say, can you dig deeper into this? Can you bring us more data on that? Show us this. Did you ask that? She could do it in no time because everything was so organized. So her ability to come back, to return from the field, to take those organized notes, and everything was meticulously organized. I think that is critical for field research in general. And I know that that's not always the case, so that is something that I really appreciate. And I think is really
Natalia
important.
had to recently ask me to unshare my data folder so that her Dropbox could have more room.
To pay for Dropbox premium.
Come on, what they pay you enough? They pay you enough at NYU to order Dropbox.
I don't know. They give me free Google Drive, and I kind of I'm an immigrant, right? Immigrants don't waste money on data you can store for free. This is old immigrant habits, right?
I had the same story with an old colleague of mine, a superstar entrepreneurship professor at my old university, really big star. And he said, "Oh, my Dropbox is full." And I said, "You gotta be kidding me. It costs you $7 and you have hundreds of terabytes." Yeah, exactly. I was like, "What, are you kidding me?" I know how much money you make.
Sarah is a very important Virginia professor, and you're making her waste her time to clear up when you could just order more Dropbox.
All right. Let's erase that. Appearing as cheap.
Yes, and I just have to say, I pay more than $100 a year, so I don't know what's the $7 magic number that you say.
That's Europe.
He's not multiplying 7 times 12.
It's a month.
For a small one. No, don't pull it.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say something though that's important to our process that's been now on a couple of papers, and that I think is worth highlighting. Because and that's been very painful maybe to Sarah or just our progress, but we don't settle for things we don't believe in. So unfortunately, it's not a linear process. We write, and if we don't feel we are convinced but what we're writing or the data is there to support it, we undo and rewrite. And even on like super tight deadlines. So I mostly remember was in December, whenever the submission was, and you would bring me something like we physically were together, so that helped. And the discussion and like go and like, no, that just doesn't make sense. I rewrite it and like, oh, deadline's tomorrow. Like we cannot put, and this helps because both, three of us are on the same page there, where we don't feel that if we don't believe what we're writing in terms of it's not supported by data, in our understanding of the context of our study, we would not do our very best not to put it and submit it and like work till the last minute to make it authentic, because that to me is a grounded theory process. You cannot like write stuff that's nice and easy to write if the data doesn't support it and you push and try to rewrite
Yeah,
it.
that should be our scholarly or scientific integrity, right? There's absolutely no way we should put our name on something we don't believe in.
But the problem is, of course, with deadlines, right? Especially issues push us, but they also like sort of, oh, now we're gelling, we understood this much, we're writing, and then it doesn't quite like correspond to the data and our understanding. And then unfortunately, like, I always joke that this type of deadlines we write till we drop dead, right? Like we keep.
Yeah, we would have this discussion, and while we were talking about concepts, we would have an idea about what to name something, or an idea about how to structure the findings, or something would feel so clear when we were talking. And when I would go back to rewrite it, the quotes that were there and my remembering of the context of the quote, maybe the quote sounded right, but then when I remember what they were really talking about, it just kind of started to fall apart. So even though it felt like it was really, all these ideas sounded good in like in our discussions, in the writing, it happened.
Sarah would like take a deep breath when they say like, no, that's not gelling. So, okay, we're gonna go and rewrite it. Really
a lot of rewriting, but it was okay. I mean, that's what we expected. I don't know. That's just how I guess
that's what research is about. If it's easy, it wouldn't be research. I mean, right? I think that goes with it.
I think it's important though to know how much rewriting goes. People always have this illusion that you write, especially like students and even myself going into it. And I remember Leslie Porlo told me like, you never write, you rewrite. This is what we do. And I think having that, knowing that it's all about rewriting and like the amount of versions that you are supposed to get really helps. And even like the numbers, like, some people don't tell you, you have this illusion that, they just write the paper, like maybe they edit it 3 times and that's it. No, like there could be tens, hundreds of like versions. And then you get a realistic expectation, I think, going into this. And you just need a lot of chocolate. That's my other important point.
For me, it's
Sarah
scotch.
knows.
Scotch. So this is something I meant to ask you. Again, we touch upon this right now. So you talked about the deadlines a lot, right? And they were tight. And you may know that they were tight by design, right? So we had one of the ambitions that we wanted to show that it can do publish, review, and do all of that in 1 year. That you can do the work from the initial submission throughout all the review rounds that it takes and get it published in a year, right? So that was the ambition, and we sort of drilled. That was hard on the reviewers. It was hard on us. It was hard on the authors, especially, of course, right? Because we didn't have a lot of time to give you for revisions. What we didn't foresee, of course, was that the pandemic hit, of course. And if I remember correctly, Natalia, you had an accident as well with your foot, and and then in my case, we had a baby, and all these sorts of like life goes on and happens. So. And we didn't foresee this, of course. And at times we felt really bad about, oh my God, in this context, can we say, people, this is another major revision, we give you 4 weeks. So how was it for you, right? So we often wondered about this, but how was it for you? Be honest. I mean, surely it was tough, but in hindsight, was it, hard?
It was hard. It was hard. So I would say putting aside kind of the extra circumstances that all of us found ourselves in, just life and family and the pandemic and new additions to the family and losses. And I mean, these were very difficult times. Just putting that aside, it was very hard. I would say all the pandemic challenges added this like extreme difficulty, but I'm trying to feel like what it would have been. I think because this was my kind of data fresh in my head from my dissertation, and really I could pour a lot of myself into this time-wise, and my teaching is kind of concentrated. So I was able to put a lot of time into this, but I think even if I was a few years later or had a ton of other things, to juggle work-wise, this would have not come together. What do you both think?
Yeah, I think
I was able to devote all of my work hours to this when I needed to, which isn't always the case. My teaching, if I would have had anything else going on, it would have been really, really impossible. It was almost impossible, and it was the only thing I had at some time. So go ahead, guys.
I was just saying that, like, it was in the summer. I'm trying to remember when the biggest challenge I usually write is at first revision. Like, we got the R&R, and we pushed a lot when the first submission was due, but that was before the pandemic, and Sarah was fully focused on it, job market side. The second one was already during the pandemic, right? And we were all struggling with family or something, and at least Sarah didn't have her baby yet, so that really helped in the periods because it would have been maybe close to impossible if you had your baby like at that revision, because that was a huge revision. We had to find a new focus. And I think the next one, I'm trying to remember how it went, but we did also kind of take turns a little bit, because when I couldn't work due to my family circumstances, like sort of Hila and Sarah pushed, and then when it's like we take turns a bit, how not in terms of still being all involved, but who does more editing and who does more writing, kind of that. But I think that having small children and other family obligations made it very, very difficult. So
we learned from some of the author teams. Some of them comment positively, and they said that it allowed them to keep everything fresh in the front of their head, right? Because you never had a half-year break in between, so you didn't have to re-immerse yourself with the data. It was still fresh in the memory. So some of them appreciated the pace for that matter. But now that you said that,
it was fresh. While you say that, though, it took us a long time to kind of, when we submitted a paper, we felt so strongly that we nailed it. We thought we had a really clear picture of the data. We thought, and so to get a review in such a short period, a month later, 6 weeks later, to tell us, okay, completely, rethink these pieces. We were still so attached to them, and we believed in them. We agreed with many, many points in the review, but even just to mentally kind of disassociate with one and reassociate with a new, it was kind of a fast, emotional.
You get yourself convinced in what you write, right? And you need some time to detach. So I can only add that I think, like both of you basically, and the editorial team, it really makes a difference. So I think if we had not a clear review letters and the editorial voice was missing, and we would just like scatter ourselves around different directions, that it would all collapse. But the fact that there was a clear voice from the editorial level of, these are all the reviews, but also this is where we think you need to focus, that really helped us. So I think the clarity in the review letters is really important when you want to do these short cycles. Like otherwise the authors can get lost between just, 3 different reviews.
I was going to add, I think the presentations we had with feedback were also
yes, that was the best. I forgot to say
very, very
that
useful,
was the best.
We understood better what you really cared more and less about, especially because there were kind of a couple of things that were like, we were thinking where we were going, which we presented, and you were like, no, that we are not interested in, more or less. And so that was like good, because it helped us focus on
it's
what
great
you guys
practice.
were
I've never had it anywhere else. That was great practice to, I think, endorse in general, to do with authors in such tight deadlines. I think that was really helpful.
Actually, I saw like other special issues had in person, right? Actually, I think virtual worked perfectly fine.
Yeah, it did, didn't it?
Everybody makes to those in-person ones, and you then don't really get your team, you get somebody else, like, and then you kind of like, it still helps, by the way, even in I remember the ISR special issue on whatever social media, the one where my paper with Manuel is published, that we had that and was super helpful. I don't think we would have had this paper published without that workshop. And I think the fact that you guys did it, I think we should establish this practice for special issues.
Yes.
Virtual
was good.
Perfect.
I remember that too, because it was one of these, if you think of them, bizarre academic practices. I had a flight booked to Chicago to be there for 1.5 days. I would have been more on the plane than actually there. And I never even double guessed that. At that time, that was just what you did, right? Now it seems ludicrous, right? And then, of course, all of that got canceled and we did the virtual workshop. But even on that day, I thought, wow, this is so much better because every single paper had the focused attention of everyone. Right. Normally, you'd waver off at some stage. You just would sit back in the mass of the audience but now at this time, everyone got the full attention of the entire team.
Yeah, but Recker, here's the thing: if you would have come to Chicago, right, you and I would have gone out in Chicago that night, and we'd have had stories. And here now, what did we do? We went and I probably watched Netflix that night or something. I don't know what I did.
Yeah.
Lion King or whatever that guy's name is.
I must say, I know people are now discussing the value of virtual. For three of us who are now mothers, and back then the two of us were, mothers. The idea of us actually going places would have been so much harder. So only one of us probably would have gone to the actual workshop and leave the family. And I think that besides, yes, do we miss the bar scene we would have had with all of you guys if we were there in person? Absolutely, but it allowed all three of us to be there, which for our family situation probably would have been impossible.
Well, same here.
I'm guessing
things are going to change.
Sarah would have gone because it was before her baby, and that was it, and we would have been at home with our family. So that was an important thing to remember for the future.
True.
We will find a balanced version. It doesn't have to go back to the craziness of flying for a day and a half and not only be stuck at home wearing pajama and nice blouses for a full year, right? We will find something and watching Netflix, right? We will find something in the middle, I hope, next year. That's what I hope.
I hope so too.
So Recker, I have to tell you, I totally fell in love with this paper throughout the process, as I did with so many of the papers that, that we've, and what's interesting is we had 2 ethnographies. And Hila, what you were saying is I would really like to do HR and really, if you think about what's AI doing, it's HR and radiology, right? Those are 2 of the big ones that we heard. And those are our 2 ethnographies, right, that we're publishing in the special issue. So I think that's great. We have a couple other really wonderful, and I'm so proud of the special issue. And I really appreciate everything. I feel like each of these papers are in a way like our baby, Recker, like you and I, we're the parents, and these are our...
I literally never thought that way. Absolutely not. But...
I guess all five of us.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you guys are grandparents.
Grandparents, all right. I'll take it.
We're the grandparents.
Fair enough. No.
We can't wait to see the special issue. I think it's really, I think there is a huge advantage. So even though it was hard of us, but just if I don't think about just myself and us and our paper, but I just think for the field, what you've done, to step so early and to claim we need to understand the managerial perspective on AI, there is something major. We are at least 5 years behind. The industry is there, research is not. So even to have good research papers that we can quote, that we can teach based on them.
When you say industry is there, they're not. Industry is not there. Industry
it's there in the sense of implementing and selling and investing money in it like crazy without any managerial guidance, without any and we as business schools are behind. That's what I mean. We are not giving them the right guidance. We do not have the right theories. We are just, drinking the Kool-Aid with them of the industry that is pushing the AI and vending and the computer science perspective. And we're just trying to make sense of it. But now we will have a special issue to, show, and with richness of different contexts and different methods. I think that is so important. I think the fact that you moved early and that you did it fast, right? So I applaud for that.
So
I was gonna second the notion of teaching, by the way. A lot of my own thinking on this paper got clarified when I kind of decided to start teaching it in an executive mode as well. And it's this gels, this doesn't gel, this makes sense, especially in terms of generalizability, because basically you cannot teach executives about radiology. You have to then connect the conversations to bigger issues. And a lot of stuff became more clear around what you see in the very last version of the paper, right? We're kind of pushing towards general theory and implications. Teaching is actually a very important mechanism for pushing yourself to be clear in this type of papers. And the other thing that my courses don't know yet, so it's going to be a surprise. I actually submitted a paper to AI and Radiology Journal the team is specifically writing about this paper because they're talking about the challenges. Basically, the paper was on the topic of how radiologists should evaluate AI, and they heard about our work. And they said, like, it was super tight deadline, like half a day, literally. So I couldn't even talk to you guys. But I added basically a summary of our paper because they weren't thinking of this issue. They thought about everything else,
Wait,
acquiring data.
Are Sarah and Hila and Recker and I co-authors on this paper?
You are acknowledged. This is like, in medicine, there are 10 co-authors. So like, it's really the first person writes, the last person sponsors. And there's like a bunch of people in the middle. And I wrote 2 paragraphs, which were about this sort of importance of understanding and unpacking ground truths.
Managers
I'm just saying that this is like, they never thought about it. Like I thought that they would on their own. And they're like, yeah, ground truths. But like what you really are saying, like what the implication is, that's what this paper allowed us. But we will write more papers together with like practitioner focus, I'm sure.
Definitely.
So,
Managers will need to evaluate AI in different contexts, in HR, in finance, in sales. So that's what we hope this paper will help think about. How can managers evaluate, how should they evaluate AI across different contexts? And why is it so important to do a thorough job of evaluating it and not just jump and rush to adopting?
So Nick said he feels like a parent. I certainly don't. But I will say, like, I think all the 7 papers in the specialist, to me, they're all paper of the year candidates, every single one of them. And I'm just so happy that we can publish your paper, to be honest, right? So like I feel very proud, like a book publisher that is very happy that this author would come to them, would come to us and let us publish it. So that's how I look at the paper, your paper, and what you guys didn't see, but what we saw having that portfolio view. The other thing that makes me proud is that we have every single research tradition, basically. Well, we have almost all of the research tradition, and they're all over the place. We have the ethnographies, we have econometrics, we got field experience, we got simulation, we got a theory paper, all these papers, all of them can make a contribution. So it doesn't really matter what you do, and we can put these turf wars aside, and all of them shine in a way. So that makes me really, really happy, because I think that's a great signal to the field. That's obviously, none of that is our doing, it's all your doings, to be honest. So that's why I mean, like, thank you guys for allowing us to publish it and working with us through such a difficult time. We know we're pushy. I hear that Nick is a pushy being. I'm obviously not, but so but
I should have written to you.
Absolutely, all the time. In fact, everyone should send me emails all the time.
We didn't know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with all of you. Recker, I think we should have this group back on and start figuring out what's going on there at the water.
I want to figure out what's with NYU and why we can't get Dropbox. That's really an issue.
Yeah, what's wrong with the budgets there? Are they running out of?
It's a COVID years. We get no budget. Next year, I'll get my Dropbox.
Next year, Natalia gets, that's a perfect episode title. Next year, Natalia gets a Dropbox.
Will Natalia get Dropbox?
Exactly. All right.
The next thing we know is like the dean is emailing Natalia. Natalia, just remember you can use your budget for Dropbox. We heard on a podcast.
Natalia,
we heard it on a podcast.
You have free Google Drive.
This year. Google Drive. We use Google Drive.
Let that be our
like a paper about incentives and cloud computing, right? Look, we need to write the incentives for the adoption of cloud computing models.
That's my next. I'm sending it to a conference.
Beautiful special issue. When will it be online? I'm now curious about all the other papers. Where do we get to read them? Or even like early abstract or something. I'm curious.
Well, the abstracts are already up on the MISQ page, all of them, all 7 of them. Some of them are open access, I think, but it's the next issue that comes out. We're really happy that they really slotted us ahead of everybody else. Right, so it'll come out in September. All the papers are in production. I think they even finished. So Jan de Gross is doing an amazing job, really, again, pushing everyone, including us. And so everything's ready. It's wonderful. Wow. Like, so, we all do go on hopefully on a nice summer break. And when we come back, we'll have a nice issue.
But our listeners are not listening to this until September. So
fair enough, right? So you just all had a summer break, and now you're back, and you can listen to this while you browse through the papers.
Yeah. Hila, it's on the website right now.
I didn't know that you
can look at MISQ.
The HR paper is also very interesting.
Wonderful. So and the fact that it's in September is amazing, the beginning of the new year. That is amazing. So that is the strength of that crazy timeline, right? Like that is important.
I think on special issues, just gonna say most of my papers have been published in special issues. Most in the MySQL summarized or like, and like it's if not, yeah, pretty much. What I was gonna say is you can do the submission fast, but you would have had to do the thinking and the work before, right? So even the one, my most cited paper was a MySQL special issue on knowledge management. That one was also written for this, like that we sat down and wrote it on a deadline, but the work was done, right? So you can't like fool yourself and say you can do the research in 2 months, but you could push yourself in writing if you have a good team. And that's what I think we have discovered. We did it with a good team of editors and a good team of reviewers and a good team of courses. So anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
No, thanks for coming on the
Thank
show.
you
We'll
all.
have you, we gotta have you back at some stage. So that'll be good.
Thank you. Would love
Alrighty.
to.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.